creating audio, but the main thing I'm wondering now is can the individual. So now,
The only thing, and
can we do a sound check with everybody else?
Hello, hello, hello. ABC.
Can you?
Yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather.
I think. Headphones there, like, see if there's that audio feedback. If you get that echo, usually that's a good sound line check. And they'll, individuals that are participating in Zoom typically point out that, hey, I can't hear.
Hey Larry, will you give a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Anyway.
All right,
Thank you.
we're good to go. We're live.
Okay, greetings, greetings, greetings. I'm gonna call the meeting to order. My name is Lauren Edens and I will be chairing for our illustrious Chair Joe Farmer, who is going to be on in the background. He has a prior commitment. If he becomes available, I'll pass the reins back to him. Today is September 3rd at 5:30. This is the Administration of Public Works Committee. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Larry Brost. Councilmember Lauren Edens.
Here.
Councilmember Tracy Nyan. Councilmember Joe Farmer. Councilmember Marshall. Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Hopper.
Here.
Councilmember Albers.
Thank you very much. We have a quorum. Moving on to approval of minutes. We have both July 15th and August 5th. My understanding is that we have some editorial corrections made by Councilmember Marshall. Would you like to go ahead and?
Actually, I'm gonna print them off and I'll bring them to Amy. They're just some of the wrong names and dates and times.
Okay.
So for example, the Tuesday, July 2nd. Minutes for July 15th.
Okay, so we shouldn't approve that without the correct date though. So I think we should go ahead and make a couple editorial corrections.
And I didn't actually bring the 5th with me, but there was another one. Some other stuff there too, so I apologize for that, but we didn't have these for the last meeting,
Okay,
so we didn't approve them. But in this particular case, I know the date can't be right.
okay, right, yeah. So let's go, can we go ahead and make that editorial correction? So the meeting should say July 15th.
So on the minute copy itself, it says July 2nd meeting. And then we're showing July 15th in the agenda for this one. So I think it was the July 2nd.
Oh, it was.
Or it is a second,
Hold on, the
so one of these
15th.
is wrong, that's what
Yeah,
you're
so
saying.
this is what I'm saying, this.
That one might be. That one's wrong.
So was the actual date the 2nd or the 15th?
15th, I believe. I think we, because of the holiday, we pushed it.
So then it's wrong on the minutes, the July 2nd. Needs to be changed to the 15th. And then I was filling in for Joe as the chair, but yet we get back to the back and Joe was on Zoom, but it said that he closed the meeting. So just needs to be tweaked. That. So in the last, under the motion 4 on the last page, it says the Chair Farmer declared the motion passed. In that particular case, I believe he made the motion and Tracy seconded it. So the last sentence should be taken out. Yeah. Does that make sense, Amy?
It will when I'm looking at it. I think
Okay.
it'll be clear.
Those are the ones that popped up on that one. We didn't have these for the last meeting to review, so those were just those.
So
So-
my question for the committee is, do we feel comfortable trying to approve the July 15th minutes right now with the verbal changes incorporated?
If there's changes, we can incorporate those at the next meeting and bring them back for a full edits recommended tonight. If that would be preferred.
That would be, I'd say that would be preferred, and then we'll postpone the 5th.
Just wanted to make sure the dates all match up. I couldn't get them to match up. I was gonna call Amy and I didn't.
Just for procedures purposes, could I get a motion for that? Made by Councilmember Marshall, seconded by Councilmember Hopper. Voice vote, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, rolling right along. we'll get those taken care of. So next up, we do have public participation. Just a reminder, the speaking time is 5 minutes. Abusive and profane language will not be tolerated. It's a time for you to share thoughts rather than engage in a back and forth. So if you have specific questions, please direct them to staff or a specific council member. So I will turn it over to our Administrative Assistant of Public Works.
We have Arnie Sprunger that would like to speak.
Down.
Well, I hope we're not the J-turn people. I heard the title. I'm gonna get rid of that title here soon. Anyway, thanks for letting me speak. This is gonna be really pretty short. I really have just a couple of comments. Well, really, maybe they're more like recommendations, okay, that I would like to at least bring before you. I'm not sure if you're the right group to bring them to. I think maybe you are. This is as a result of, the recent experience with the J-turns, but it really, I think, is broader than that. And the first recommendation that I would like to at least submit and at least have you consider is when the city is going to go, do a project. In this case, they went for a grant, they got the grant. But once the grant is submitted and approved, it has a particular plan. And when I talked to Ryan Piercy at MoDOT, in this case, he said, you change the plan much at all, then that kind of gets discarded. So my recommendation on that whole thing is, wouldn't it make sense to maybe have public input first? And that way the department would have more of an understanding of what the citizens are looking for. Because once that grant goes in, your options are severely limited. And it really puts, I think, the city council and you all kind of in a corner because you just don't have as much that you can work with. So that's my first recommendation. My second recommendation is to follow what I think is the protocol for even processing these kinds of things. Because like at the July meeting, this subcommittee meeting, there were a few things that the department was to go off to MoDOT and discover and talk about and, discern that sort of thing. And it was my understanding it was going to come back to this committee, okay? So that they report back what's going on. And it's a public, there's public input that's possible, like what's happening right now. Instead, it went directly to the city council and it was in a work session. Well, the work session doesn't allow public input, right? Public comment. So there were 3 particular points that I think the citizen would have wanted to make as a result of the meeting that the city had with MoDOT. The first one, thankfully, the city council did address, and that was that left-hand turn off of Highway 100. And and on behalf of the citizens, we do want to thank you, really. You guys, you did good on that, and we thank you for that. Thanks a lot. But there were 2 other items that we would have liked to have been able to discuss that we couldn't. And for example, the first one is, and the department, and to their credit, and I want to thank Director Brown, they tried to address this adverse travel issue, because that's what nobody likes is the adverse travel, right? And so they apparently worked with the design people and they did shorten it somewhat. But interestingly enough, on the eastern J-turn, they shortened it enough that one of the benefits of that particular J-turn was it benefited the people going east on 100 and the pond drivers. You could actually use that J-turn and it would give you access to the community park. That was kind of a side benefit. It wasn't the goal, obviously, but it was a side benefit. Well, by shortening it up, the J-turn, now you can't get to the community center or community park because it's on the west side of the entrance. So, I think they probably made the right call though, because adverse travel is the biggest issue. But speaking of adverse travel, this brings me to the third point that we weren't able to talk about. And that is, I don't know if you noticed, but the adverse travel length on the eastern J-turn is 1,200 feet, okay? If you notice on the west J-turn, it's 1,600 feet. Now, why is that? Why can't we just have the adverse travel length the same? If it's deemed safe at 1,200 feet on the east, why can't we just have it 1,200 feet on the west? That way, everybody is treated the same, it's fair. It just seems like that would be a reasonable thing to do. And so, kind of in closing, I hope it's not too late. But I think the citizens, and I certainly would have this last ask, and I think that's it. I don't think there's any other issue. So you won't be seeing me anymore unless you really want to. You know, our last ask would be, can we just not make them the same? Just make them both 1,200 feet, call it a day, and we're done. I don't think it's an unreasonable ask. I think it's probably our last ask. Anyway, so that's why I think it's important, back to the main point of protocol, following protocol, why we need to have public input before final decisions are made. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Any questions? And by the way, Director Brown, thank you for at least working on the adverse travel, but could we possibly just get both of them at 1,200 feet?
Thank you for your comment.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, if not, then without objection, what I'll ask is, so for me, I've heard a very specific question asked, which is about the difference between the east and westbound length. If we could get a response from the department that his council member can share directly with him. I'm sure we have Mr. Sprunger, I hope I'm saying that correctly, his contact information, and I'm curious as well. So, all right, that sound good. Do we have any comments online?
Charians, we are clear.
All right. Moving along, we have two consultants that are here to give us updates. And so first up, we've got our legislative consultant. Shane, would you like to come on up? And just, I'm sure he'll give a presentation and I'll keep a speaking order list and I'll try to watch the screen for hands, so.
I appreciate
Go
it.
ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, honestly, I was just kind of invited to kind of go over what happened in last legislative session. I think the first thing I got to get to is budget items for water erosion. Last year, we were successful again in getting some sort of line item in the budget, both in the Senate and the House, and fully passed up until the governor. We had $350,000 allocated to it. I think we gave a great presentation to both the Senate and the House. We even gave a great presentation to the governor's staff. There's a lot of different things that could go into why he vetoed the $350,000. I mean, the list is it's probably pages long, but I mean, I know some things that have been told to me is that the 1.3 billion that was vetoed was due to the fact that potentially he knows that the Chiefs might be leaving to go to Kansas. And so he wanted to have some sort of funding mechanism to keep them around. And then there's just some personal issues that I know that he has with some of the maybe some legislators around this area, which can be a little bit more difficult. Lastly, honestly, you know, I think there's a big stigma about Wildwood and the type of money and the type of income that is brought in from the residents here. And unfortunately, you know, when you have residents that tend to make a good amount of money, there's a thought that, oh, they should just be able to pay for their own, you know, their own fixes, their own creek issues and things like that. And unfortunately, from the numbers that we've looked at, just based on, you know, the 6, you know, creeks that we really want to focus on, that number is way too much for, you know, the average citizen to pay for that. So in all honesty, I feel with the turnover of a new governor coming in, you know, most likely Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe will be elected as our next governor. He seems like a very reasonable person. I know him personally. I know I believe he's actually been out to Wildwood several times. And I think that kind of connection will be good. You know, I also think with, you know, Highway 70 already getting fixed, or plans, you know, to get it fixed, along with maybe having enough money to keep the Chiefs here, if that is in fact true. I'm hoping that basically Kehoe will move forward and just focus on some of the local issues and some of the issues that are truly affecting the, you know, the houses and the constituents. So, you know, I think that's probably the biggest, you know, that's obviously the biggest focus in the last 2 sessions. Unfortunately, it got vetoed the last two. I'm hoping with a new governor, we will see us get across the finish line. I think we had the right steps last time, which was to lower the amount that we were asking. We were even offering maybe to do a split, 50-50 split. For some reason, the governor continues to fight us on it. And there was, $1.3 billion that were vetoed. And so, every single lobbyist, everybody got hit. And unfortunately, there was a lot of upset people, but I think a lot of the lobbyist core is looking at the future and feels pretty bright about it. So some of the other legislation that we saw last year, there's a little bit of stuff on sales tax exemption. The MML, including all the lobbyists from municipalities. We fought that pretty hard and pretty much shut that down right away. I think there was two bills, one from Mary Elizabeth Coleman and one from Senator Holly Rader. Honestly, we thought that was kind of political posturing. They were both running for higher office. In all honesty, we kind of felt pretty confident that none of them were going to go anywhere. We threw a pretty big fight the session before, and with elections coming up, it was going to be pretty hard to get that passed. And then lastly, there was the video service franchise fee. The Missouri Municipal League really took they were kind of the main, fighter in that. They struck some sort of deal. They didn't go into too much detail on what the deal looked like with the streaming services. I know from my understanding is that there's still a lawsuit going on between the Missouri Municipal League and those members and the streaming services. I don't know how that's going to play out and how this legislation that has passed that allows these streaming services to use our right of ways. I don't know how that affects it, but I can definitely ask the Missouri Municipal League and their attorneys what the process will look like from here. So, like I said, there's a new political environment. I think this is the most turnover that we've ever seen in the Senate. I want to say there might be 13 new senators coming in. Yes, there's going to be a lot of Freedom Caucus members or Conservative Caucus members, but in all honesty, I know them all and they seem more reasonable. And so I think there's going to be a lot less fighting in the Senate, which will probably lead to a more reasonable governor when it comes time to pass the budget. And it hopefully gets done earlier than the last day of session. So, any questions for me?
I'll open the floor up to any questions, and if not, I've got a couple. Councilmember Marshall?
Yeah, so of other requests for stormwater runoff or flooding issues, any other municipalities receive any money at all?
There were, I want to say, out of the RSMO, that chapter of the budget, I believe there was 7 requests, and I think 4 of the 7 were vetoed. And what I do recall of them, and I'd have to go back and I can pull that information for you. What I do recall is they were very, very small towns. And so, our governor grew up on farmland. He grew up in a small town. He's had fights with the county before. He's had fights with members that represent the city of Wildwood. And so I think that we might have a better chance with our upcoming governor, to be honest with you. I think he favors the county a little bit more. And I think that, in my opinion, I think it'll be a better relationship in total.
It'd be interesting to see the last 2 years, how many got it and how many didn't, as we try to go forward to figure out what do you do for this. Maybe there's something we can learn from what the successful ones have.
Yeah, and I mean, there was some, the year before, the session before, there were some crazy ones. I don't know if everybody remembers the St. Charles water contamination issue. They vetoed a $10 million project to clean that water, the governor did. And that was a personality issue. He didn't like Senator Bill Eigel, didn't like Senator Nick Schroer. And for that matter, I think that was kind of that's where he stuck on the issue. Personalities are quite interesting in that building, and sometimes you just got to find somebody on the right day, and sometimes on the wrong day they'll make you pay for it. And so I'm hoping that this upcoming governor will be a little bit more lenient on the city of Wildwood and the county as a whole. And the projects that need to be done, if we're so focused on the Kansas City Chiefs staying, if that is in fact true. Or making sure that Highway 70 is widened or whatever they plan on doing, just remember that there are people that houses are falling into the creeks, their trees are falling into the creeks, they're losing land. And it's scary. I'm sure every night they go to sleep thinking, what's gonna happen next? 2 more feet falling into the creek. That's a terrible thing.
It'd be great if you could get us that information.
Yeah,
for the last few
absolutely.
Years,
Yeah.
we can have that work from.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
No.
Okay, I've got a couple questions, but
Mhm.
I just really appreciated your last comments about the bigger picture and maybe there's ways, and I know you've already tried this, but to build coalitions with, the cities that our creeks abut or feed into. Chesterfield, we feed to the Missouri River, because if we're out of control, they're out of control, so it just, it is really a downstream problem, right? But so I have 2 questions. So the money that we had in the budget, was this came from like their general fund, or did they receive this from the federal government somehow through like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, and then we're administering that pot of money? If not, how can we get a hold of that?
Yeah, so the money that we had, so the first year that we had, I guess it would be the last year that we had ARPA, which was my first year as a consultant for the city. They used all ARPA funds, and that's when we did the application process. And essentially, they came back to us and said, listen, Wildwood is too rich. There's too much money in Wildwood. The second year, I believe it was general revenue submitted to DNR, and DNR would allocate that funding, but essentially all the money, if I believe correctly, came from general revenue.
Okay, and the reason I bring this up is because this is a conversation Council Member Farmer and I have had a lot on Watershed Erosion Task Force, and you've been part of this, but just sitting through the MML lectures every year about just the tremendous amount of opportunity that's available with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, but the amount of staff resources and time it would take to go through that. I'm not necessarily sure it's something that, we have while we're trying to also develop a stormwater master plan. So I'm not sure if there's anything that you can work with us on to kind of get us over that hump, because I do go to sleep at night thinking that there's opportunities that we've missed just because we're so busy.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you're bailing water, you don't get to put a patch on the outside of the boat,
exactly.
right? And I feel like.
No,
we're busy
I
here.
completely agree with you, actually, and what I'm excited for November, because when, most likely, if, Kehoe becomes the governor, one of the first things I want to do is start planning a conversation with our Watershed Erosion Task Force to meet with him. You kind of pick and choose your battles. I always say, and as a lobbyist, you have a certain amount of chips and, that you can throw into the pot, and you hope that, you don't have to use so many of them. But I will say this, I think this is after November election comes, I think it'd be a perfect time to sit down or even invite the current lieutenant governor and soon to be governor out to Wildwood to see the creeks and what they look like. And I can say this, I have a good relationship with him. But not only that, I'm fortunate enough to, my wife works for the consultant that helped him. So the connection is also there, where I think that shouldn't be a problem to make that work.
I think that would be great. We can have Chair Farmer, when he's available as chair of that committee, maybe follow up along with our city administrator. And I know I'd like to be a part of that. And
Absolutely.
maybe we can get him in there when it's just rained and he can wear waders. So no, I'm just kidding. I do have one more question. And since you mentioned video franchise fees and some other issues, 3 council meetings ago, we had maybe 4 council meetings ago, our prosecuting attorney and our judge kind of go and get municipal court updates, trends that they noticed. Our mayor was asking about the ability to enforce planning and zoning issues. And so one of the things that they brought up is that while legal caps on fines had been very, very well intentioned in communities that were perhaps very predatory, it's had a sort of a double-edged knife effect on our city. So I know for us, even in a lot of our wards, we have compliance issues where it's just cheaper to have a fine that doesn't continually accrue, that occasionally can be doubled, than it is to actually fix the problem. It's sort of like a big polluter. It's easy to pay a very cheap EPA fine than it is to fix the problem. And so I'm just wondering, is there any sort of discussions with the MML or other cities on perhaps going back and amending that law? And if not, is this something that you think that we could kind of start having this conversation?
Well, you know what, I think you can always have the conversation, absolutely. I haven't been privy to that type of legislation that the MML has looked at. But I have a great relationship with Shannon and Richard Sheets, and I'd be happy to reach out and help in any sort of way. I try to make sure that they know on a consistent basis that I'm here for them and, you know, to help them as much as possible, so long as the city of Wildwood wants that, you know, type of, you know, focus on an issue. But, you know, if that's an issue that the city would like me to, you know, focus on, I'd be happy to do it.
I would love it if you could follow up with our mayor on that issue. I
Yeah,
know he has a
absolutely.
lot of thoughts on that and include our city administrator. And then if it is something that, you know, we can explore, then maybe include the MML. There's no way we're the only city with this problem.
Oh,
And I'm not trying to undo anything that's, you know, really helped people. I just know that the conversation our prosecutor and our judge had with us is that we don't have a lot of tools left in our toolbox and our hands are tied. And then we have very upset citizens that
Yeah, and
live next to an issue.
you want it to get, you don't want it to become an issue later down the road either.
Correct.
And it kind of reminds me of the small, the home-based business issue that, you know, that we had. You know, you had cities such as Kansas City and St. Louis who didn't even know up until the last minute, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be a terrible thing for our cities. And, you know, then the bill gets passed and, you know, you fight it as hard as you can, but, you know, so yeah, I'd be happy to have those conversations with the mayor and Mr. Lee, along with the MML and anybody that'd like to.
Yeah, and we would love an update either at this committee or at the council level. Just, yeah,
Yep,
whenever you get there.
absolutely.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
too.
Councilmember Albers.
Just one, this is kind of maybe a funny one. Do you think there are limitations on what gets accomplished in the first year of a new administration like that?
I don't know, you know, I would say it's really like, it comes back to personality. You know, if you had the two other candidates, Jay Ashcroft and Senator Bill Eigel, you might have a little bit of you know, contention there, because you've got, you know, more of the moderate faction along with Democrats that don't really see eye to eye with those, you know, with those would be the governor, if they were the governors. Yeah, but I will say this, you know, I've got to know Lieutenant Governor Kehoe over the years, and he's a very reasonable person. And I think that helps when moving things forward. And you know, I don't see it as a first term. I don't see it as that big of an issue, so long as they come in with a good, you know, a good reputation amongst other senators and other reps, and he does have a good relationship with them.
That's good. Okay, good to hear. Thanks.
Anybody else online? Going once, going twice. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Silverman.
Thank
Appreciate your
you.
time
Thank
tonight.
Do you need me to stick around, or?
I think you're free to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha.
Unless you're interested in deer management and financial policy, which, I mean, there's some great topics.
No,
there.
not at this point.
Not at this point, okay. All right, moving on, to the reserve fund balance policy. Do we have an update first from staff before we move on to the consultant, or?
Yes, thank you, Chair Edens. Tonight we have Joy Howard with us with WN Financial Strategies. She went through and went ahead and reviewed the city's annual comprehensive financial report, along with meeting with different staff members to kind of see what some of the threats are in the, you know, upcoming years. Along with also reviewing our budgets for the last couple of years, our financial reports, our audits, and has also reviewed what we did back in 2000, which was the last time we actually updated our fund balance reserve policy, which capped it at around 25% of the operating budget each year. Ms. Howard is with us tonight to give a report, just kind of overview of the report, but overall, after talking it through and discussing some of the items that the city has, watershed erosion, finishing up internet, things along those lines, it was discussed along with, you know, and this is an important note raised by Mr. Councilmember Brost as well, is that there have been some storms storms have obviously increased this year. We've had kind of an experience with it, an example this year for it, but overall, we're seeing a little bit more money going towards the maintenance of streets due to just regular rainstorms versus what we've had to put towards ice storms. So in that case, that trade-off definitely poses a little bit of risk as well. And it does take quite a bit of damage to reach the threshold of, what would be a SEMA or FEMA eligible expense and be reimbursed by the federal or state government. So that being said, tonight, there's a draft policy, also a report that was written, and our current policy, along with one item that outlines the growth of our reserve funds over the last 20 years. Tonight, we're actually, if we're taking Ms. Howard's recommendation, it would be taking that 25% and moving it to 100% of expenditures into the actual unrestricted reserve fund. But I can pass it over to Ms. Howard if you'd like to add any notes or anything specific to the process and the policy.
Yeah, hi. I prepared it, Tom kind of referenced it. It was called the General Fund Reserve Pool, which was the analysis. I don't know if you all saw it. With the passage of time, actually, I found one typo, but with the passage of time, there are some things in there that should get updated. You're not going to prove this, but you should have it on file. So, because it explains why the policy is what the policy is. So the policy itself is very short. It's only 2 pages long. As Thomas mentioned, I guess you were 25%, which isn't uncommon for a lot of cities. And some cities have lower amounts, getting into higher rating grades. A lot of cities have larger amounts. Rating is not an issue with the city anymore, at least at this point in time. You have no outstanding debt. So it's really a matter of having enough reserves to take you through bad situations, as opposed to worrying about ratings and future borrowing. Although in the future, you may have borrowing and we can talk about it then. But your city is kind of unusual because you're a poor city. You don't have basically your own taxes. You share with what the other cities are contributing to the pool. So you have limited ability to control that. We should have asked your consultant about this, because I know there was discussion about removing taxes on groceries, which could have had a big effect on all cities, but I assume since I haven't heard anyone screaming about that, so I assume that didn't pass. Yeah, but these weird things come up every now and then that could have really negative effects on the city. I work in Illinois. I've also done work in Wisconsin. And in those 2 states, they don't have the kind of restrictions that you do. Most Illinois cities have quite a bit of flexibility in raising both property taxes and sales taxes. If you're what's called a home rule city, you can kind of set your taxes anywhere you want. In Missouri, you don't have that flexibility. You have to go to the voters basically for everything. And because of you being in the county, it's even worse than that. There's sales taxes that other cities can pass that you're just not even allowed to pass. So I was trying to very quickly say, for all those reasons, I'm recommending that the city has a higher reserve than other cities, both in this state and other states would necessarily have. Looking at your past reserves in the past few years, your unrestricted general fund balance has been around 18 million. And this is one of the things I want to update when I redo this report, is in 2023, your unassigned fund balance was 19,923,000. You're almost at 20 million. So my concern there isn't that you hold a whole ton of money. It's that maybe even though you have to hold more than other cities, you may be holding more than you should be holding. So I've recommended that you, as Thomas said, 100% of your expenditures, looking at on a current year basis, but also excluding in that analysis any one-time expenditures you have. So if you look at your expenditures, I don't know about next year or the following year, and your expenditures come out to be 20 million, maybe it's because you did a capital improvement. You want to take that capital improvement out of the equation. So you're really looking more at operational kinds of expenses. But I tried to write the policy with a lot of flexibility so that you're looking at it every year and have flexibility to change the policy every year. It's really just a goal on where you start right now. And I think that's all I have to say. I said a lot.
I appreciate it. I just had a quick question. Is one of the changes that you're referring to making would be on page 5 of the recommendation? So the last fiscal year we had listed was 2022 and now the 2023 number is out. So is that like what you meant
I'm
by
sorry,
that?
say that again on
Um,
page 5.
She was just asking, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
go ahead.
She was asking if, since we have now the finalized numbers for 2023, that report would reflect that.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. And
Okay.
but it was
update.
also the table. It's not just on page 5, it's on page 3.
mhm.
There's a lot of comparative year numbers there that I want to update.
Right, okay. All right, do we have any raised hands online right now?
Oh, actually, I wanted to
Okay.
say one other thing.
Yes, please.
Once I get these updated and assuming that you all agree with the policy, then I would like it to go before the city council for approval. As I said, not the report, they just approved the policy.
Approve the policy, not the, okay. I can't see any hands up online.
We're trying to access it now and it's not.
Okay.
I think it's because the computer might be dying a little bit.
Okay, hang on there, Larry, if you got a question. We're trying to access you, so I will just ask a question then if nobody else has one right now. But my question was when you had a discussion with staff, because I know you mentioned that we don't have to be concerned about bond rating right now. And I was hoping you could give me a number. So when I had a conversation with a fire district recently, and I can't remember, but I feel like the number that they gave me was that it had to be like a minimum of 40% or something like that for a AAA, rating. And I was just wondering, do you think it would be helpful to future council members to write what that minimum is in? I know sometimes we get
So I
folks.
can tell you that a fire district is entirely
Really different
different than
for-
a city.
Okay,
And I work for several fire districts. They tend to keep very large balances, but
okay,
I don't think I have any clients that intentionally have more than 100% of expenditures. And if you went for a rating, I'm concerned if you drew that down, but I'm not concerned about keeping it at that level.
okay,
That should be sufficient.
okay. And I know you said you didn't see anything that we needed to do that right now, but I know we talk a lot on the building committee. I mean, we're still trying to find out if we can literally fix the foundations of this building. So I see lots of construction issues on watershed erosion in the future where, it could be within
Yeah,
five
it's
years.
it
of
it is
issues.
very possible
Yeah.
that in the future you would want to do a bond issue, in which case we would totally re-explore.
Okay,
whatnot.
questions online? No?
It's gotta get rebooted.
Can you raise your hand, Larry, if you, okay, go ahead and unmute and see if we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Nothing.
Hello?
There you go.
Yeah. Good? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, no, he unmuted. We thought you had comments, Councilmember Brost, so we were giving you the floor.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't have a comment.
Oh, okay, all right. That's
I
all
made
right.
some comments earlier.
Okay.
So I feel I'm covered on that.
Okay.
Thank
Would
you.
any- Would anyone like to make, or Councilmember Marshall?
I'd love to. So Joy, one of the things we typically talk about, big capital expenditures and that type of thing. When we reviewed and revised and approved the charter 3 years ago, there's a cap in there,
I
three
forgot,
point two
yeah.
million. That we can't do a project without going to the voters for a capital project over that. I didn't see any reference at all in your write-up about that provision.
Because to me, it has nothing to do with the reserve, other than you're not going to want to, if it's a small project, you're going to want to use this money that you move over, which I'm assuming would go to the capital projects fund.
It would be planned out.
But yeah, But
And if.
you can also do lease financing with, does that go to the voters too if you do lease financing? Any kind of financing,
Well,
right?
it's more, yes, it's more so if the city spends direct dollars of its own, which would also result in if it went out for financing, because you have to pay that back. If it equals that amount, then you do have to go out to the voters.
And it's cumulative spending.
Yep. Yeah, of
So
course.
on a project where we've spent money over the years, whether we've got federal money or not, once it gets to 3.2, whatever, it then has to go to the voters. So it's just one more reason, I think, that gives you time to do it. I was here when we only had the $800,000 reserve.
Right,
And even then, the pressure you get, and as we would try to move forward, and I was here and went knocking on doors for the capital fund in 2002 for that half a cent. People that people are receptive in helping. But when you see that you have a year's worth of revenue setting on the balance sheet, you are not gonna get funding through for stormwater or for parks or anything else. So I just think it's a real concern. I'd love to have a lengthy debate about, I know how we come up with the 25% and everybody thought we were crazy. And then we're at 25%, now we're at over 100%, and it's like, where does it stop? I mean, I think there's been a lot of good things done, but are there things that we should be investing in that long-term are gonna cost us more and more? And Lauren's a good example on just things with City Hall. Well,
well,
let's
I
not
think
worry about it.
that's part of the idea of putting a cap on it, is so that you're not just accumulating. And you'll be able to address citizens if they say, why is your unrestricted fund balance now at 20 million?
I think you'd be shocked. You gotta knock on some doors and talk to people. They don't understand why you need a year's worth of their tax money and you're sitting on it. Whenever they think that their street needs repaired, they think this needs repairs. I mean, it's not, I understand financially and saying it, but when you start trying to represent the people that vote for you, that's a big issue. And I think we need a better answer than, oh yeah, we want to keep it at 100% of the city expenses.
Well, and that's why the, that report goes with it, because the report, I think it's much easier to see why you're doing that. I didn't even talk about things like COVID and different things like that impacted all cities, but I did have a table in there.
That's great.
Where you can see what COVID did, not only to the city, but to the county as a whole. And hopefully COVID in and of itself made some of the desire to have bigger reserves more transparent. I can tell you, I worked for a lot of cities in 2012, the Great Recession. Oh, I may be a little bit late. 2012 was when assessments dropped way down.
Yeah.
But I worked with cities that basically had their reserves going down to zero. They didn't know what to do. They were closing things up. And it's like, okay, we're never going to do this again. We're going to build up our reserves. And then lo and behold, during COVID, they hadn't done that. And they got in financial binds all over again.
So if you were to pick a similar city, setting on reserves, back 20 years ago, when you're doing this, 25% was very rich compared to what you would do based on the way our funding, and we know that the county's slow in putting money through. What would be a good average? You believe they should have 100%?
I guess I can't really tell you because a lot of it just has to do with growth and how they do annually and I'm trying to think of what city that is. I'm working for a city, I'm not gonna say which city it is. I'm working for a city right now that just passed a general obligation bond issue. They're only paying probably about 10% out of a debt service levy, and the rest of the money is going to come from sales taxes. But if you're familiar with GO bonds, you're allowed to set any tax rate it takes to pay off the debt. They don't need to have a huge reserve because if at any point in time they start getting low on their sales tax, they can increase the debt service levy. So that's just one example and I don't try and put any cities together. Every city
I'm
has
just
their own
curious because I know we're
situation.
very unique the way we do things.
Exactly.
But there ought to be some thought put into exactly why we have what we have. And when we did the 25% years ago, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, so what's the worst thing that can happen as a city? And, we have people on payroll, but if suddenly we have those issues, we still have services to provide. But now the police budget is a
We
separate
talked about that quite a bit, the worst case scenarios.
bridges.
Because what we tried to figure out is if we got into a worst case scenario, how long would it take to get to voters, not for a bond issue, but to ask for an additional tax? And how long that tax would take to get into effect? And that was part of the decision-making on the amount of the reserve.
Great, thank you again.
Thank you. Oh,
Oh, just hang out just a second. Yeah, this is a for action item, so I think it would be great if we could have a motion. I know the report needs updated, but if you're looking for a motion tonight to go ahead with the fund balance policy. But I will say too, I do understand exactly what Councilmember Marshall was saying, but I will say, I don't think it's your job or staff's job to take the heat from the public about why they feel like we're sitting on a gold mine. That's my job, and I'm willing to do that. So I think we have, as a city, struggled to communicate over the years, and some of that has really caught up with us, and it's caught up during COVID. So that's incumbent on us, if we have a sound financial policy, to be able to explain, right? So one of the things we've had discussions about is, what does it look like when we're a sales tax city and our sales have now shifted to online and we did not pass an internet use sales tax? What does that look like for the future? So these are discussions I'm trying to have with my residents, and we can all do that, but I don't want you to worry about my constituents. I'll worry about my constituents. If this is your advice as an expert, I think I understand it based on, you know, the threats coming to the city. So I support your conclusions.
Tonight, with your, tonight the department was looking for, proceeding to the general counsel for it, but in this case, if we want to have, the report updated, we could bring it back to the next meeting for review.
Are you available for the next meeting?
oh, I have no idea. When did you?
Let's ask. So I know we have some scheduling
It should be the 21st is the Monday. Oh, yeah.
of October.
Yep.
Or is that something?
I don't have all my calendar
Okay.
with me. What is it?
In this case, we could coordinate that piece, but I could speak to the report as well.
Yeah.
It's gonna be
But the
21st.
policy itself isn't going to look any
Yes.
different, just so you know. It's only the company.
No, wait,
Only
all
the
of that.
update. So does anybody feel comfortable tonight with approving the policy and coming back with a new update? Or I feel comfortable with that, or would you prefer to have it all in one? So I've got Chair Farmer is available.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it would be fine if we move ahead and have everybody have that discussion, as long as we have the updated report. And I also think it would be important, Tom or whoever, to have like what that actual number is, if I'm understanding it, like taking out whatever capital projects and things we have for the year. I don't know what that actual number is off the top of my
I
head.
can't tell you what it, I thought that was
It
actually
is.
in here for 2023. It's a number that will change every year,
So
but it's in the policy. It's for 2023. Now where did I stick it?
just to be clear, Councilmember Farmer, you're making the motion?
Yeah, I'm happy to make the motion. Yeah.
Yes, for it to come back for an update at the next meeting. She is available for, preferably within 60 days, seconded by Mr. Albers. Continue, please. Thank you.
Oh, did you want me to?
Did
Oh,
you-
it was
the number, yeah.
11,850,000. And that's the expenses that came out of the 2023 audit.
So then I assume as we kind of just move through years, that just ever so slightly or whatever moves up, right?
Most
As
likely,
expenses increase.
if it moves down, it means something very strange has happened.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, any more discussion? If not, we're ready for a vote on the motion. Since hasn't been a lot of contentious debate, is everyone okay with a voice vote, or do you want a roll call? All right, voice vote it is. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstained? Okay, thank you very much for your time tonight, and we'll see you hopefully at our next meeting if you're available, and if not, I'm sure we'll get a scheduling update. Okay, moving on to the biannual Gazette and alternative communications update, please.
Thank
It's also
you.
for action.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair Edens. So in this case, at the last meeting, the Administrative Public Works Committee, we had reviewed the kind of the rising cost of producing and publishing a biannual Gazette each year, and how those prices have just increased from the side of, you know, the design cost, but also with the staff time put into it. the management of it, along with obviously production and printing and the current material that we have. So we went back and we went to our new communications and economic development manager to ask what could we potentially utilize those funds for while also maintaining a semblance of, we want to keep the print mail media because a lot of our residents do speak highly of that type of, communication. That being said, there were a couple other ideas that were kind of mixed in there, maybe switching to a annual gazette that is mailed out, pretty similar to what we currently have. But it would be almost have the first half be like a year in review, with the second half being, here's the upcoming year, giving you a calendar, giving you input much for the entire year. It would also cover the entire year's calendar too, so you'd have dates for everything that, we're gonna be running since we publish our calendar at the end of December of each year. The other piece though is while taking, you're taking away a little bit of the communications, would be reinvesting that into our couple of different items. We'd be putting more digital editions of the Gazette. It would be something a little different on what we call issue. It's something you can go online. It's typical. It's similar to what we currently have, but you can produce videos. You can have a little bit more engaging content. And that does cost a little bit of money there. It's about $35 to $44 a month to keep it up on the actual website itself. So budgeting around $1,000 for that. But on top of that, the goal would be to kind of create a more of a master, put a little bit more money in the first one Gazette that we do issue each year, which was around 35,000. But how we would, actually constitute those costs would be investing in the production of the assets. So the graphic design component, but also the video that would potentially put in there where you take the Gazette, not just putting a PDF on the city's website, you'd be putting it on issue where you would have more click to engage type of content on our Gazette versus what we currently have, which is, print media with a PDF put online. The other piece would be putting money towards the city's 30th anniversary, putting together some, better web filters, outsourcing to a different e-newsletter contractor, which would no longer be Civic Send in that case. It would be something like Constant Contact was a discussion we had. It is a little bit more costly, but overall we have heard from our residents that, a little bit of a better e-newsletter could be beneficial. One thing I wanted to note before we make any decisions is that currently we did put in the current Gazette that's getting mailed out next week is a survey that will be going out. It's really quick. It's a 5-question survey that pretty much it's trying to address what is the success of the Gazette in getting information to you, and if it's not the best way to get information to you, what is the best way? So it asks 5 simple questions. We're hoping to have results put in not only from the Gazette, but to avoid bias, push it out both on social media, our e-newsletter, and our website, and also have QR codes here at City Hall, but also have them up at the Celebrate Wildwood event that's coming up, just to make sure we can get a well-rounded input from each individual. But the main thing is we're trying to kind of piggyback off some of the responses we've got from the 2022 resident survey, which showed only 7.68% of residents saying that the Gazette's the best way to reach them, with the e-newsletter coming in around 35% and social media coming in around 35%. So trying to see if those results can be replicated. We hope to be able to close the survey around October 31st, giving people enough time, both, with the Gazette. That's usually when the events are kind of midstream. Most people should have already read it, and we will be kind of giving it a timetable to push it on social media on the website too. So tonight, the department's just requesting a little feedback on this approach and the potential recommendation, but the department today is respectfully requesting consideration on waiting for those results to come in before making any decisions to see if it could be if we could replicate the same results.
I have a couple of questions for that. Yeah, one is I think it would absolutely make sense to hold off until we know what the results and numbers are. The other part of this, and I think for me, just taking a holistic look at this of the part that's missing, unless I just have glanced over it, is as you said, there are hours that are involved in this. So there's a huge amount of opportunity costs and just hourly rate costs and salary and what people have to put into this. So I would love to see, as best as could be estimated, a comparison of, well, this is what it takes to put 2 print copies together versus if we're going to ramp up a digital version, that still takes time and effort for somebody to put that together, to gather whatever it is, information we're going to put in there, create the graphic design. So I think it would be great to see that so we can really compare
an overall cost comparison, versus just, this is what it costs to produce, to print the Gazette versus it going to be to put it online. right? So
With your permission, Vice Chair, I can answer a little bit of that. It's around, just for myself, if you take myself, around 15 hours I'm putting into reviewing multiple editions of the Gazette and putting final send off, but also our accounts manager, who kind of stepped in a little bit late here, but she most likely put in a little bit over 15. And then our city clerk was handling a lot of the management of the project beforehand. She probably put in a good 15 hours as well, but then each individual article comes from different departments. So everyone provides a little bit of their own input, and then we formalize it into one generalized format. That is the number that I would need a little bit more info on. We're recording how many hours with who are actually handling the conversations with Colby Co. But we did not nail down from each individual department, which we can go back and see if we can get that a little bit better handle.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to have, and I know it's probably virtually impossible to get an exact number on that, but to kind of get a pretty good estimate of overall how much city time is spent in it. And like I said, if you're gathering information from each department, if we're gonna ramp up and do more on a digital aspect, well, what's that gonna take to put more into a digital, just from a time perspective of staff? To really truly compare those costs. I mean, I'm just, as a personal note, I'm all for anything that we can transition into a more digital approach to things, but would love to see it make sense. Or at least have a good comparison.
And so in this case too, and what I was kind of, well, at least the department was kind of thinking, and we can definitely put that together, and we can set up going into the first edition for next year. We can say everybody, kind of record how much time you're putting towards it, at least as close as we can be. And in that case though, when it was looking at the digital content, more like an issue, the goal was to start from the one we would mail out at the beginning of the year, but also incorporating maybe a video or two with some better design elements as well. And then the other component would be just maybe updating that, keeping it hosted on issue, but then also going in and just making sure that, if there's a date that says, hey, it'll be completed by this date, it goes in, hey, it was completed by this date, now we're moving on to this phase. So it wouldn't necessarily be everyone producing multiple gazettes each year that would go online. It would just be keeping a consistent, the major overarching gazette, keeping that one document updated, what's on issue. That was,
Okay.
sorry if that did not get that clear.
No, that makes more sense, but yeah.
But it still would take time.
So just a comment, I always just kind of wonder this survey, but 2022, that was all done on the internet, correct?
That was done through the internet and it was on the Gazette. It had multiple different.
I just find it amazing because as you go out to homeowners meetings, they're not aware of the e-newsletter. And they do depend on the Gazette. And because they'll make comments about, well, that date might have changed or that meeting was canceled or whatever. So years ago, when we used to do calendars, we struggled to try to get this stuff in before you went to print for the concerts and all those other events and said, okay, we're gonna quit that. But then people said, well, I don't know about the trash getting picked up. So any way you can get something more current, I think is fantastic. But I think asking the people the preference versus are they looking at the Gazette or not? There's a lot of people that at least will keep coming back to me about, I looked in a Gazette and this is what I found. But then when you ask them, do you get the weekly e-newsletter? How do I get that? Or where do I get that? So any way you can get more information to them and make it a little bit simpler, I think that's the case. I think the other issue that's kind of missed here, and I know it's just really nice, but for years, we didn't do something this expensive. And we didn't have as many pages to proof or edit. And we did 4 times, 6 times a year or whatever. And I know that's more expensive, but there's a whole lot of expense in just this method of doing it. So I know that we want it to be very nice, but some of that's self-inflicted, my honest opinion. So thank you.
Maybe a little bit on what Councilman Marshall just said. I think at the last meeting, I think the overall feeling was a year-end publication was the way to go. And something less fancy than this, maybe more magazine style or something that just, I know that's expensive. That trifle thing is very expensive to do. So I think most people would be in favor of that, a year end and a less expensive publication.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I got one, Lauren.
Go for it.
Yeah, just, I agree with everything you guys are saying. I just know, having done this in the past, that the style that we use for the Gazette, like that, size of paper and the weight as a whole of all of those pages and stuff, it really does up the expense quite a bit. I mean, I almost wonder if we need to try to find a way, and maybe we can do this, you know, with a QR code or something at Celebrate Wildwood. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time to figure it out, but not just asking people how they would like to be communicated, but what they would like to have communicated to them. Because, you know, there are some things that we're required to put in there, I assume. There are other things that, you know, we need to try to update much more quickly than we do. And I know that we're going to do a better job of that with our new communications director. But I do agree. I go to a lot of these HOA meetings, and there's a lot of people that are just kind of confused as to how to get information from the city, whether that's even something as simple as like the music on Main Street or a street project getting done, or whatever it is. They just, I don't know if I haven't been able to figure out if we have too many sources of information coming at them or not enough. And, you know, we can't make everybody happy, but I do think we need to try to make a more kind of cohesive standard way of doing that. And so I would suggest that, but I would also just reach out to whoever prints this thing for us and find out what the different expenses, just to change the aspect ratio of the pages and things like that. It will be substantially less expensive.
Yeah, I was just to piggyback off of what Chair Farmer said. I was just wondering, sitting here, as if it was, you know, newspaper style, more like West News.
Yeah.
What could we still afford to do it twice a year? And I do have to agree. I do have probably more residents that read the newsletter than know about the e-newsletter or are subscribed to it. So that's a continual that's the verbal feedback I get a lot of. And if you are going to do the survey, I know it's not a Gazette specific question, but one of the things I'm curious about is, you know, how residents get their emergency updates. So how do they know about a road closure? Is it because they tried to drive on it and then they couldn't, or are they signed up to SLOCM, which is St. Louis County Emergency Text? I am, but you have to opt into that. Maybe they only have a weather radio and they get their news from Facebook. So I do know that we have emergency response organizations, like our fire districts, that are interested in this question. So if we don't ask it now, we're gonna have to ask it in the future. It might be cheaper to include it on this survey, even though I know it's 100% not Gazette specific. But if this becomes a communication survey, then I think we need to add that question in. Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion to, it sounds like, based on Councilmember Hopper's initial comments, that you prefer to see the survey results before making a change, is that correct?
I think this definitely would require some additional information, really around all of the comments that were made before we would make any kind of decision on what are some other printing options, what the survey results.
Are you making a motion to postpone?
I would make a motion to postpone.
Okay, excellent.
To review
Seconded.
those options.
Yes.
I think that's important. And
Yes.
Postpone it for now, but to do the options, let's look at some of those other options.
Yeah, I think we just have a lot more information gathering to come into to say it's a good
Magazine.
recommendation.
Is a good thing. I think that's a good thing to look at, that kind of option, you know?
Yeah. cheaper
I guess they
newsprint.
probably send theirs out for printing somewhere, probably.
Yeah,
They don't do their
they
own
do.
printing, I don't think, do they?
Now they sent it out to print after.
Well, and it's-
days ahead.
Councilmember Farmer had stated too that
Yeah.
we can go to the printing company and say like,
Right.
hey, what's our least expensive options to do this in a way that doesn't look like somebody drew it with a crayon and threw it away.
My
Yeah,
question
the
about
the printer should be able to come back to us with literally like 3 or 4 different paper sizes, paper stocks, all that kind of stuff, and say, this is how much this costs, this is how much that costs, and then we can pick what we like best.
My question for staff is, by doing this, does this affect any of the budgeting or delay anything in a way that is inconvenient for staff?
No, in this case, the department was planning on putting the budget towards 2 different gazettes next year either
Anyway,
way.
okay.
And it would have been more so how it was gonna be reposed today. Well, if the survey came back and supported a different method, would be, we would just retitle that appropriation in the budget, that account from the Gazette. It's actually it says newsletter, city newsletter. It would be more to resident communication, so it would allow a little bit more flexibility.
Okay.
But in this case, you know, 2 things of note is the labor that goes into it, the staff time, which does add up, and then postage. That is the one thing we can't, but I think we we go back to Swift, they can definitely provide us with some better options on the cost to produce it. But the postage with it rising, it is going to be to get to our residents each time, it's gonna be about $6,800. And that's with postage. It's gonna increase again here shortly. It just did it in July.
Start using AI, this won't be a problem.
That's the hope.
So if there's no other discussion on the motion, can we go ahead and get a voice vote, please?
Well, give me a second. Yeah.
Second.
Yep, I thought we did. I thought. you
I'm
seconded
happy
it.
to second it.
Aye.
All those in
Aye.
favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? Moving right along. Deer management, oh dear.
All right, thanks, Vice Chair Edens. Quick update on deer management and we went out back in April, had the police department after any culling operations took place in the NE1 area. And 300 deer were culled successfully. We had the police department go out and actually do the raw data collection that is necessary to do a deer population survey. So before the spring brush was in full bloom, they were able to get to the NE1 area, which was obviously the primary priority here. But there was also, they were able to get in the NE2 area in April of 2024. In that agreement with the police department, really more so directing that overtime cost. They will be getting to West 1, West 2, Southeast 1, and Southeast 2 in November of 2024. And White Buffalo has committed to getting that data analyzed as well. So we should have something probably in the December meeting to review for the remaining maps that have not been surveyed just yet. But we have some pretty interesting findings just from what they've done so far. So NE1, good news, at least from this survey, which you do see there is a pretty large variance. That confidence interval is pretty large, but we'll get to that in a second. What you'll see is if you look at the entire area that they surveyed, they came in at 73.5 deer per square mile, which is down from 94.5 that was reported back in 2020. So that is good to see. That being said, with the 95% confidence interval, that leads you from anywhere from 50 to 107. That's pretty wavering. So in this case, we did speak with White Buffalo as well about better ways to maybe ramp up and make those collection methods a little bit more airtight to hopefully shrink that range. In this case, though, something of interesting note, what kind of guides into the recommendation is that when they took out the area, there was a large farmland property that the city was unable to get rights to access because of some liability insurance requirements that the property owner is requiring. There's a lot of deer up there. And if you take out that property and then you take out the roads, Shepherd, Streckard, and Valley roads, you actually reduce that number to 50.4 deer per square mile from 70, around 73.5 deer per square mile. So those specific areas seem to be very problematic because there wasn't the necessary access. So in this case, kind of getting into the NE2 area, White Buffalo reviewed, and you have the report in front of you tonight as well, but they reviewed the NE2 area and actually saw a pretty large increase. In 2020, we had 64.2 deer per square mile. And what you saw in 2024 was 94.2 deer per square mile. So in that case, since we have fresh data on it, they believe that NE2 is a very, that's what they specialize in. They specialize in going in these more densely populated areas. Obviously, we're seeing, at least from the raw data that we have and the analysis that we have from 2020 and 2024, that there was an increase. They are putting together a proposal right now to address the NE2 area for 2025 as their primary area of inclusion, but then also trying to revisit and including, a couple days to go back to those couple areas that we have back in the NE1 area, to go back and address those, to then allow us to go back and revisit those numbers to see if we could duplicate that 50.4 number, deer per square mile. So really tonight, we wanted to provide the analysis that came through from the data collection from the police department and the analysis from White Buffalo. That being said, we'll also be proposing, right now we're working with White Buffalo to get together a proposal and agreement for the 2025 efforts. What it would include is the NE2 area for primary focus, and then having NE1 revisited, at least on Shepherd, Strecker, and Valley roads, along with trying to go back to that large property to see if we can get access.
Is that the Manchi property?
Yes.
Has anybody talked to Bob?
Yeah, we have. It's more so The problem was they were the individual property owner was wanting a very large liability insurance requirement, that White Buffalo doesn't actually carry. It's even above what the city would require.
What about the state? Cause for years he allowed us to have the Department of Conservation go in and take 70 or 80 out of that bottom. That was my old stomping ground there. And he was always real receptive, but so does the state have some kind of coverage that he would allow that, or is it just now a bigger issue from an insurance standpoint?
Well, that, it was more so, what happens here is the city, we require them to provide their liability insurance, but the other component here is that each individual property owner is technically covered under, say if something bad were to happen, White Buffalo would be the one to actually cover that issue. In this case, White Buffalo and the property owner were unable to come to an agreement on what that number should be. And the department will admit here that the number that the property owner was requiring was higher than what the city would require. So it was just more than what they would what they would have to go out and purchase additional coverage. And we could request information from Erin Shank to see if there's a way.
Well,
for
she
the
was
state to
involved in
cover it.
the last ones, but I mean, they were really good about it. And I know one year it was 70 something, took off of that, just in that bottom. I mean, I used to drive up there at night, you'd see 28, 30 deer standing right there in the cornfield. But then the other question would be is if there is cost for that additional coverage, it may be a heck of a lot cheaper for the city to say, let's pay that difference instead of another, $600 or per deer to be able to go in where it's that concentrated to do it. So I don't know, he's always been so receptive, or I've always thought he was, with bridge easements and all the other stuff to work with and be interesting to see if there's something that could be done. Since they're that concentrated right there, but seems to be always a pretty good guy to work with, so.
Okay, in that case, we can reach out to him and see if he can, well, in this case, we were working with a Mr. Bertolo for this property up on the northern edge.
Is that his son-in-law?
It could be, so that, I just wanted to mention that it was a Jim Bertolo instead of Bob, which I don't know if he's kind of stepped back from handling that, but you're very right, that property specifically has more deer than you could.
Yep.
If you could find out the differences between where he was on the prices and stuff as far as with White Buffalo and what it would take. He's just a good business guy, but I think it would be well worth, instead of saying, this is the cluster we have, to be able to go back to him with the numbers and say, hey, here's what's going on. Could we work something out? And then ask the Department of Conservation, because that was a sweet spot for them. About every 3 or 4 years, they'd come in there and do a planned kill on their part, because they were able to actually shoot right into that hill. So,
Sounds like you're making a motion to proceed with negotiations.
well, I think we ought to find out what it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes an insurance policy is $300, for $1 million.
The difference, I will say the difference in coverage is $3 million. So they were able to provide the difference between what they're expecting was 3 million for personal liability and bodily harm. So it might be a little bit more, but we can get that number.
I don't know. I just thought they were always, and actually they came to the meeting.
We talked to him numerous times. He came to the meeting and we worked really hard, and at the end of the day, we couldn't get him to agree, and the insurance was a sticking point. I even thought we looked into the cost of the additional insurance, and White Buffalo was not able to get us a quote. That partly might have been due to just the time ran out on the clock, frankly, but
Anyway,
we're
again,
committed to trying again.
doesn't know me anything. I just thought he was always really fair historically with working on projects and stuff and easements and things, but you hate to see that big of an area and not kind of figure out a way to make it work. Thank you.
Would anybody like to make a motion to proceed with negotiations as recommended by the department? Come back to committee?
I'll make.
All right, seconded by Councilmember Albers.
This man in here.
All right, I appreciate it. I mean, I usually the chairs by Robert's rules is not supposed to make
It's hard to run a meeting.
motions, so.
Nobody makes a motion.
You have to pull it out of people. I'm just so I understand, do we still have our contract with our retired police officer that was liaising some of this process, and that doesn't need renewed like right now?
It will probably come up on it sometime this year, but we have not spent the entirety of
Okay, so I guess besides this one specific property that has an additional insurance issue, who who is dedicating the time to go back and work with property owners in any one / any two? Is it a White Buffalo staff member? Because they're not local, so who's knocking on the doors
So
asking?
in this case, it would be a lot of external communication going out, holding some public meetings that will be coming up here in the next month or so, once we lock in any two as the area. But then the main piece is having people report, hey, we're interested, and then having them come in, and then having Brad go out, because he just can't cover the entirety of the area.
Right,
And in this case, we just don't have the budget with him, and he doesn't have the time to, since he's retired. He's not,
Yeah.
it's not a full-time role for him, but he is willing to go out there. If we know someone's interested, he's willing to go out there and knock a couple doors. And if it makes sense, he sees the site and it says, all right, I know White Buffalo would see this as a quality site. He'll knock on a couple neighbors' doors as well. But it's not like he goes out there and knocks each individual door. In that case, I mean, we could do that. I would say we'd need to probably bring in some backup.
yeah, I'm just thinking of some specific properties along Strecker that are kind of these one-off houses that, you just drive up an acre driveway and then probably the quickest way to reach them is to knock on a door. But for some of these, I mean, between the two of us, Ed and myself, we might have a cell phone or an email. So if there's a house that you're targeting, feel free to reach out or use us.
I'd say, yeah, and the department is happy. The more information, the better. If there is a resident that's in the area, please pass it along so we can send them communications. Right now, we are kind of mapping out the individuals that have filled out the resident feedback form, and we're putting that on a map, which we do have some decent prospects in any two, but anything that we can get from the council side that, contacts you might have, the better. In a lot of cases, if it's not 3 acres in size, you're probably gonna need a neighbor or two to work together to allow cross access. So on those denser neighborhoods, it's really important to get collaboration.
All right.
We need to vote on
Yep,
that.
we need a vote. Everybody ready? Let's do a voice vote again. All right, rolling along. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay. All right, Public Works. No items for information for action, proposed new right-of-way management regulations. I saw one editorial change as a heads up, just the mayoral name needs changed to Garitano.
Wasn't that the most recent version? That's the same version we had in August, and the lawyer was gonna go through and update it.
Yes, so in this
What
case,
I had loaded that one.
we have enough, I was gonna report on that piece because we have, there's a small little addition that we had discussed and that now has been incorporated. We got this a little bit late, so I'll kind of explain it to everybody. The departments have spoke about this a little bit just with the permits that have been pulled and what has been successful. And we're hoping to also include a project schedule when someone is looking to work within the right of way and get a right of way management permit. That schedule would be a standardized form that would pretty much say the start date, the anticipated end date, and then any major milestones in between. And the other component of that report is if you don't have that submitted, then you're not getting the permit. The second piece is the weekly project reporting requirements. So if the project's gonna take more than 7 days, maybe it's not just cleaning up a broken pipe or something for MSD. It's something that, hey, the full system's broken, we're closing down the road. What it would require would be a project schedule that show, hey, here's the date we're trying to get started, here's what we're thinking is gonna end, and here are the major milestones in between. And then each week they would have to pretty much submit a checkup, pretty much to the Department of Public Works director, saying, hey, here's where we're at, here's what was improved upon over the last week, here's where we're gonna be doing the next week, and out of the total, the 100% of the project, here's where we're at percentage wise. And then the main component, are you still able to meet your end date that was initially anticipated in your project schedule? And then the good thing about this component is that if you don't have, if the contractor isn't able to meet the requirements of their project schedule, you can hold them to it that. They don't submit the weekly reporting or the weekly report that they would need. In that case, the first time you could just put a cease order on their work and until the individual turned it in and was able to get reviewed. And then the second time you could revoke their permit. So in this case, it gives the city a little bit more teeth and it hopefully helps us get the information we need to communicate with residents if there's road closures, if there's going to be any utility issues that are surrounding this. We're gonna now get that information hopefully on the front end and then throughout the project so we can keep those updates since utility companies might not necessarily be pushing out to the whole city. They might just be hitting the individuals that are being impacted by the project. So that's the real addition, but I can turn to Director Brown if there's any other items that he wanted to touch upon. This can, and this is turned in by the city attorney, we can have this language for you, we can send it out in an email after today, after tonight's meeting.
So it's gonna come up for the meeting, for the next council meeting?
We can have it there, that's what we're requesting tonight, but if there's.
I went back to read through it and I didn't find any changes. So that was just my curious. The other one was the August 5th version, so. If it's ready to go, everybody, yes.
I didn't have anything further to add, although I would like to recognize former Councilmember Clark's participation in the meeting. If anyone's getting hungry, I am personally, so I did want to thank her publicly. But if there's any questions, I'd be glad to respond to them. I think it's a welcome change and will provide us a lot better clarity in terms of expectations to the future.
I think this is a great idea, and now would be a lovely time for us to have a motion, and if we still have 2 online, we'll have enough for a vote, but. Okay, we got it, all right. So made by Councilmember Hopper, Councilmember Albers is back in the room. Do we have a second for the motion to proceed?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Let's do a voice vote for proceeding as recommended by the department. Corrections will, the most updated version rather will come to council. Right-of-way maintenance, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I need to remember to take my time on that. Any abstain? Thank you. Moving on to bids for Manchester Taylor Road resurfacing and signal improvement projects, Wards 7 and 8. Take it away.
Council members, we opened bids last Thursday for our Manchester Taylor resurfacing project. And we received 3 bids for that project. We did budget for construction in 2024 to begin. Our budget was about 2.3 million for the improvement project. As you, I think, know, that will include resurfacing of essentially Taylor Road from Manchester, from Route 100 down to Manchester Road, including the roundabout. Also includes Village Hills Parkways south of the roundabout down to the First Side Road, and I was Victoria Crossing, very good. And includes the piece of Manchester Road, basically in front of Schnucks over to Route 100, as well as curb and sidewalk repairs and the replacement of the traffic signals. So a variety of work included on the improvement project. As I mentioned, we did get 3 bids from contractors to construct the project on Thursday. Unfortunately, the bid that we received that was the apparent low bid is from a company called Infrastructure Management for about $2,985,000 and $989. So it's just essentially shy of 3 million, frankly. It's about 24% over our estimate, our engineer's estimate for the improvement project. So we're a little disappointed in that aspect of the bids and the fact that we got 3 bids. We'd like to have had more if we had our preference, frankly. At least we did have 3. I will point out that Infrastructure Management is not a company that we've contracted with in the past. However, we do know something about them. They are kind of a more recently formed contractor. A couple of years ago, Krupp Contracting went out of business. We had worked quite a bit with Krupp over the years, and they were located in Ellisville nearby. And so after that occurred, Infrastructure Management is a upstart, includes a lot of the folks that were formerly at Krupp. So they're not, while the company itself is new to us, a lot of the folks that are there are not new to us. I'm not getting that correct, sorry. So I think we feel reasonably comfortable in that regard with moving forward, but tonight I'm not asking for approval of a recommendation just yet. We have our consultant, Cochran, reviewing the bids, and we'd like to take this to MoDOT first and get bid concurrence from MoDOT before we move forward with any action from the city and you all tonight. Also would like to evaluate East West Gateway earlier in the year, and I think I referenced this in my memo, has a new program. Does allow us a one-time adjustment on federally funded projects. And this is a good thing, and I think cities it's one of the things that I had pushed for, frankly, in the past. So based on the bids coming in high, we can go back to Gateway now and request an increase in our federal funds for this improvement project to help cover that gap. And so we've started the process. Brendan has reached out to staff at East West Gateway. We've started the process of making that request. They do have monies available still, as we understand that this year for that program. So I hope to know more about that as well. And I guess the thought would be to report back to you next month with more clarity with regard to the recommendation and potentially moving forward at that time. So I guess this is not a request for action tonight, but more providing you information, and I'll certainly answer any questions if you have any at this time.
Hopper and then Marshall.
No, I don't care either way. Couple of things. One comment that, yeah, whatever we can do to get this going through, because I live right over there by the Schnucks, and surfacing would be very welcome, as well as the light replacement. Those lights have been awful. You pull out of my neighborhood out of Lake Chesterfield.
in 2000.
Yeah, if you're turning out of Lake Chesterfield onto Manchester, it's easily 3-4 minutes at a minimum that you sit there and wait for a light to turn green. It's really bad. Everybody in the neighborhood has really been complaining. But my question is, does Cochrane have, I guess, a rationale reasoning around why it's so much more expensive than what they had estimated?
Well, we've had some discussions with them and internally about that very thing. And short answer is we got 3 bids. And the more bids, the more competition, and usually the price comes down. But I think it's reflective of the market that we're entering right now. And you know, MoDOT has a ton of work coming up in Wildwood alone, frankly, in the next 6 months. And they'll be bidding in September, project Route 109 BA, which is we're participating a little bit on that one. But then in February, we have 2 improvements on Route 100 that are going to get packaged with their project that's going to get bid. And that's going to be, I think, around a $20 million project in and of itself. So this is a fairly small project relative to the work that's coming out. And I think it's not surprising. We've talked about this potentially being having an influence, you know, that these smaller municipal projects are going to become the lesser desirable projects for some of the bigger resurfacing projects, contractors out there like West, frankly, it's just my opinion. I've not specifically heard this from them, but this is a project that's got resurfacing, it's got sidewalk work, curb work, signal work, a little of everything on it. It's not just a big asphalt project, but they can just go out there and do one thing and make a ton of money if they do it well. And this has got a lot more components, a lot more moving parts, a lot of staging to build it under traffic because of the roundabout, because of Taylor Road, just more complicated for the dollar amount. So
we're getting a charge that's a premium on their time because it's
essentially, yeah.
what the estimate is. So, yeah, I guess I was just curious as to say it's a 24% over of why that would have changed so much. But timing, I guess, timing's everything a lot of times for these kind of things. So I guess it makes sense.
I'm not surprised that we're seeing it, no.
Could you speak a little bit to some of the other bids that even MoDOT's been receiving? I mean, they've been coming in somewhat high as well.
Well, I mean, I think that's something we could do a little more homework maybe on and report back. Because I think, you know, we received for our concrete street replacement project, we'd actually received a good deal of competition, decent amount of bids there, and we saw decent prices. So I was hoping to see that play out, but clearly we didn't with this bid. But I think this is what we're seeing in the industry, this wave of work that's hitting. You know, MoDOT just started their design build improvement project on I-70. If you drive I-70 between here and Columbia, you know, they've got 10 miles under construction already. So they're putting up hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects on the street here over the next coming months and years. So there's a big wave of work that's hitting, and contractors are all lining up and trying to figure out where they're best fit.
Get a big chunk of that.
Yeah, I want to get a big chunk of that, so.
I'm sorry, our bid process for this, we do closed bids, correct? So what each competitor is bidding, that dollar amount is not known to anybody else, right? Like it's closed bids to us and then,
After we receive the bid, it's public information. So
okay, so
we read it, we read the low bid publicly and then we tabulate the bids. And that is available publicly to all of the bidders. Yeah.
So, a couple of dumb questions. Because it is so complicated. And I know that we've already gone after the grant money, would it not have been possible to say, keep the sidewalk stuff with the sidewalk people? Keep the other types, so that the companies are coming in to bid, don't have to bid on being able to do everything. So your sidewalks and your curbs and that stuff, have that be bidded by the people that we know we had bids before. And not make it as a complicated bid for somebody who's gonna try to bid on everything. Maybe that's why you got fewer companies. I'm just curious. And number two is, how do you get the federal money to go across the road into Cherry Hills? Or is that not in there?
Well, so technically that part of the project we added after we submitted our application, so it's not eligible for federal funding. So actually, if you look at our budget, we bumped the budget up after we put in the application.
So the 1.4 is the federal support, the rest of the
original-
city.
Yeah, the original budget was based on, did not include Village Hills Parkway. It was a lower budget number, and that's where that 1.4 came to be, frankly.
If you were able to take that piece of improvement and bid it under your other contracts, your street with T Hill and the curbs, is there a big difference, savings?
I don't know if I would go that far.
Just
in
curious.
saying that,
I mean,
frankly, because
There's bound to be a reason that you only had 3 bids. And there's no doubt it's complicated, and
Yeah.
a lot of big companies wouldn't even
So-
wanna mess with it.
like West Contracting, I was hopeful they would bid the project. They actually have expanded their capabilities for this type of project, so they do concrete work. But I'm sure they have a limited amount of resources, frankly, but I know right now they've been working on MoDOT projects where they're doing this very type of improvement. So I was optimistic that they would bid it. And we put it out in the street very early, in my opinion, because I anticipated this was primarily a project that would be constructed next year. So I figured we were ahead of the bidding wave, frankly. Now MoDOT bids throughout the year. They don't wait till December, January for the following year. They bid throughout the year, so. It's really hard to.
I was just curious, but I think maybe you should probably put a sentence in your write-up when it gets to the council that Cherry Hills is not part of the federal grant. You have to read really deep.
Well, I can clarify that, sure, certainly.
I mean, it looks like we're planning to use federal money to get into Wildwood Street, so. That was
In
my-
some cases we can, but this was added in and was not part of the original.
I get it. I just think you're probably worth a sentence. That's it.
Any other comments? All right, sounds like there's not, and as stated by the department head, he's not looking for a motion to proceed tonight. This was more for information, so moving along to fall tree planting projects.
Thank you very much. Council members, this has been an annual request, I think, from the department. And relative to the loss of the emerald ash or the ash trees from the emerald ash borer, we've really made a concerted effort over the last years to have a project to replant trees. And lately, we've had a goal of replanting about 200 trees. That seems to be a reasonable number of trees to plant from our perspective and our ability to get bids and follow through and get everything done over the course of a reasonable planting period. So essentially, we'd like to move forward with a project this fall to plant another 200 trees. And we did an original RFP with Davie Resource Group about a year ago, as I referenced in my memo. And so we do have pricing that will apply for this fall through Omni Tree Services. Omni was the low bidder on that RFP about a year ago. So the pricing that we'd like to move forward with was included in their bid at that time. So we'd like to move forward with a project with Omni this fall to plant about 200 trees. The price would be $84,000. That's based on their bid of 400, excuse me, I thought it was 420.
Yeah.
420 per tree. So hopefully the math works out. So that is the recommendation for you tonight. I would point out with respect to tree planting, I think since 2017, if my numbers are correct, we have planted with this project, we have planted about 1,100 trees. So that, and accounting for the treatment of the trees that we've done, puts us almost whole with regard to the loss of trees due to the emerald ash borer. So we've made some progress. I think, we might want to reconsider the 200 trees maybe next go round potentially. Clearly, there's some trees that we've lost in that time period that we have not replanted. So I think there's probably still a need maybe of another decent sized project potentially, just to say we're caught up maybe. And certainly we have plenty of locations we could plant trees on, frankly. So there's always that avenue as well to potentially address. So at any rate, the recommendation tonight is to move forward with a agreement with Omni to plant another 200 trees for the amount of $84,000 this fall.
Made by Councilmember Hopper.
I make that motion.
All right,
Can I ask a question first?
sure.
Make the second
You
first.
can make this a river, but if
Sorry.
you're not comfortable with it.
I thought you were gonna ask for questions first.
It's okay.
Can
Sure.
I- On Old Manchester, the bottom of a lot of the trees, you got a grade around them. There's, I'll just say, a growth coming out at the bottom of a lot of these. I don't know if that was a planned, something was planted in the bottom of all these, but if you look, it's pretty excessive nowadays and looks a little ratty, I'd say. And just being new, I don't know if that was a planned.
Well, if you have specific locations, let me know. We generally tell our contractors to keep an eye on the tree grades and keep the weeds down. We do have a tendency for weeds to pop up.
I don't know if these are weeds, it just, if you, are they?
So
Well, weeds are, then they're pretty bad, yeah, so.
because we've been working with them and instructing them to make sure they keep an eye on them and spray them and pull them. So I thought we were in pretty good shape, frankly. So if there's a specific location you're aware of, or you want us to check it out, let us know. And we'll be quick to get on it.
Are you specifically referring to on Manchester only? Because we did just have a concerted effort to go out and check every tree well by our contractors, but that was
Okay.
as done recently. I think it was potentially last week that they were out there.
I can keep a pretty good eye on it. I won't say there aren't occasions where weeds pop up, because I'm sure they do, but
I'll look again, but I'd be kind of talking, from in the town center on Old Manchester, a lot of those have got excessive growth at the bottom of them.
well, I would suggest, I drive it every day. So if you see any particular ones,
Okay.
let me know.
Yeah.
Start walking it.
I drive it every day too, so.
Drive by is not good.
Maybe so, I don't know.
Unless I've missed it here just in the last couple of days, but I will get back to you.
We have a second on the floor?
I could second that
All
motion.
right, seconded by Councilmember Marshall. Any comments or concerns? I just have a quick question, which is if a resident is expecting a tree replacement from one that was removed a couple seasons ago, I'm assuming it'll be in this batch, but if they have questions, is it best to reach out to you or a different, individual for scheduling?
Well, they can reach out to me, they can reach out to Mike Walsh, our arborist. Mike's gonna oversee the program. If they want to reaffirm their interest with us, that probably wouldn't hurt. I know we've kept a list of those folks that have reached out to us, so we should be following through, but it's never a bad idea not to double check that. But hopefully, yeah, we should be reaching out and are able to pretty much address, I think, most of those folks that have asked or expressed a desire to have trees. Now, we do have folks that don't want them. And generally, we have not forced trees on people because we have others that would like to get them still. So we tended to pass those folks by, frankly, if they specifically said, I don't want a tree. And we've got other places and folks that want them. So for what it's worth.
All right, and if there's no more discussion, we'll go ahead and move on to a voice vote. Oh, okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Very much. Moving on to proposed street acceptance, our last for action item for New College Avenue, Ward 8.
Council members, this last request is relative to New College Avenue between Route 109 and West Avenue. So that's the section that is east of Route 109, not west of 109. That section of New College was constructed some time ago, really over essentially 2 phases. And really, if I'm being honest, probably 3 development projects were responsible for the dedication of the right of way and the construction of the road. Primarily, it came through development that was called Westridge Office Center, which was started by McLean Properties somewhere after I was doing some digging on this around 2002, 2003-ish, I think. The phase 1 development was completed. That was 6 office buildings. They're kind of just nestled up next to Route 109 south of New College. Then phase 2 was proposed. And about the same time, Rockwood Bank was proposed. Rockwood Bank went in successfully on the north side, and then there was another 6 lots that were developed or proposed for development west of phase 1. 2 buildings were constructed. The road was constructed to West Avenue, and then I guess not too soon after that, the Great Recession hit, and then things kind of went awry at that point. So essentially, around 2015, I think the building was, or the developer at the time was foreclosed upon, and the banks have been owners of the development, I guess, what remained of it since that point in time. The bottom line is we've never officially taken over the road. That totally was the intent. The right-of-way was platted as public right-of-way, and the intent was for that section to be a public roadway. So we've never officially taken it over, and I'd like to essentially move forward in that regard and to eliminate some of the lack of clarity that exists currently. There are some needs that need to be addressed. We get requests for sidewalk maintenance and work that really needs to be done. It's important that it gets addressed, and we haven't really had the clarity to move forward and get that done. So I'd like to move forward with that work. I recognize there are other needs that will probably have to get addressed in the future that might cost a little bit more. So it's important to do that. The road is open to the public, as you probably are very aware of. We do plow it for snow removal purposes as well. We've done that for many years. So tonight I'd just like to take the formal step of accepting it and making clear that it is a public roadway. So that is a recommendation to you tonight. If the recommendation is approved by you all this evening, I would like to move forward with the city council in the manner necessary to take it on as a public street. And I'll work with John Young to prepare that legislation and present it to the council. So I'll address any questions that you might have at this time.
That's an excellent question. Are you make a motion?
I could make the motion, but then I'll question after we get a second.
Perfect. Can we get a second? And I'm assuming that is to adopt the road and prepare a bill for the next section. Excellent. Seconded by Councilmember Hopper. Your question.
How much is in the escrow money?
I haven't gotten that number just yet from Joe Vunich.
That can all be used for the cost of that.
That's correct. I'm guessing it's in the tens of thousands of dollars range, not hundreds of thousands of dollars range.
But that should cover a lot of it though, right?
That should cover a lot, although, I mean, honestly, the surface is gonna need some help in the future. And if you look at the lighting has not been maintained, and it's gonna need some upgrades and some work.
We started plowing it when the police were over there. The streets weren't finished or anything else, but they needed to plow the street. So that's when that was in 2013, something like that's when they started plowing the street, or the city took over the responsibility of getting it plowed because the police were in that other building. So
I'll be glad to find that number
I just think, you know, if you have it to add, it just makes it a little bit easier for people not to have dumb questions like I do, so.
Not a dumb
That's all I need.
There are no dumb questions.
That's right. Okay, any other comments though? All right, seeing no other comments, can we go ahead and move forward with the vote to adopt the streets? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye from Councilmember Gross, thank you. Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, that was the last 4 action item. It looks like we've got topics for inclusions on future agenda. We've got a report from the treasurer on city investment policy coming up for our next meeting in October. At this meeting, we added an update on the communications survey and hopefully a fund balance report update if the consultant's available. Number 2, use of opioid settlement funds, October, sewer lateral program, October. Proposed city consultant agreement for Route 109 and conceptual study, wards 1, 3, and 5, that's December. Proposed future capital improvement project to address groundwater and Crown Point Estates, December. And EV electric vehicle charging stations in December as well. Do we have any additional comments, Mr. Lee?
Other additional comments tonight?
No additional comments. Does any council member have a request for inclusion at this time?
I did have a question. Can we get back to the calendar real quick? What did you figure out in October?
So in this case, there is a requirement per the code unless there's a holiday that in the original calendar didn't recognize this, and the department does apologize on this behalf, but the second week of the month, should be a council meeting. If there's a council meeting at all, it should be the second Monday of the month per the city charter. In this case, originally what was approved per the city calendar was the 28th. The reason why the department recommended this was because last year we had a situation where we had a council meeting in the middle of all our committee meetings. And then when we brought budget forth at that last meeting, we actually had to push the budget presentation and mix both the public hearing and the first reading during that November session, with the second reading subsequently occurring in the December session. In this case, the department spoken with the mayor and also the chair of this committee, and we could recognize putting the actual city council meeting, having 2 in October, 1 for regular session items and then 1 for the budget on the 14th, that second Monday, and then having 1 on the 28th there, which is originally planned. Then that would push both an economic development committee meeting and an administrative public works committee meeting from that 14th slot to the 21st, but there are other openings. This was really more so to, if you look on the agenda, that's saying the 21st was to keep a placeholder. But that being said, we can send out an email after tonight's meeting to see what would be the best date for everyone, and I'll provide each date that's available.
So is there 2 admin meetings or just
The
the
plan is, the plan is to have 1 admin.
on the 8th then, I guess, right? No?
No, the goal would be to have it pushed from the, right now it's in October, it's on the 14th, but it would be to push it to the 21st. But that could be negotiable depending on everyone's.
Why did it get to the 14th instead of being the first of the month, up to the first week?
So in that, the reason why we did it, the whole, October looks a little weird altogether was because we wanted to make it so that council meeting slid in at the end of the month and every committee meeting fell within some date before that 28th meeting. So all the committees would have time to review their sections of the budget, so that it could all be pulled together with comment from each committee into the last meeting of the month. The 28th, that 28th meeting.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was more so to organize that, which, you know, obviously, we're not gonna have that happen again in the next year.
So I had asked like 3 or 4 months ago, I'd love to have an outright discussion as to why we don't do 2 meetings a month. Honestly, because every time you read something out here and you give somebody the right to question a resolution, you have 15 days. We don't have a meeting for 5 weeks. So either we need to get with the state and figure out why we do things differently. Because every time somebody has a petition, we're really not doing what we're supposed to do by law. The second meeting, and again, I understand during COVID that was more for efficiency and that kind of stuff. But I'm really struggling with why we have to jam through the meetings. And we get to the next one, we jam through all this stuff and we never get to discuss what some of the things are that I think are really important. So I'd be more than happy to talk to the mayor, but I did ask, and I see Joe's gone. Joe said, "Oh, hold off, just give me another month or so, we'll get it back on the agenda." I just would like to have and again, I'm gone for several years. I just think we're screwing ourselves with the public Because the public has expectations of when you can turn stuff around, and nobody says government's fast, but 5 weeks in between meetings, 2 or 3 times a year, is a long time. And I don't know how the staff, because some of that stuff, you gotta go back and do it over and over in order to get it updated as the last time that you publish it, so I'd like to add that to the agenda.
So are you thinking October because there's not a November meeting, December, it would need to, because we
I know,
approved
I
the
tried to do it in
calendar.
May,
I know,
and-
we approved the
and,
calendar.
And then we said, oh, well, we're just gonna, let's just get through the new election. We got through
Right.
that, and now we're gonna wait and do it. I just think that and maybe it is a legal issue. Maybe we just need to find out if we can do this. Then we need to make sure that when we're passing resolutions or especially something is being approved, and we as a council have a right to review it. If people can't appeal it or come back to you, it's really hard to explain why we say that. And then we don't have another meeting for 5 weeks.
So I guess that would be with Chair Farmer's discretion, October would make the most sense.
I can bring it up in a regular meeting. I mean, I've mentioned it 2 or 3 times. I don't have a problem bringing it up on the floor. I just think that the public
Right.
deserves an answer. And if we can't do it in this committee, I can bring it up out there, so I mean, if he doesn't want to, I'm okay
Yeah,
with that
I mean,
too.
we could do work session then if he doesn't want to, yeah.
So the regular council meeting would be the 14th,
That would be the plan,
2nd and 4th, yeah.
yeah,
and
the
then
second.
28th is more of a budget meeting,
Yeah, that would be the hope,
Okay.
yes.
and the admin would be the 21st.
The 21st would be yes, the soft,
Not the eighth,
yeah, not the 8th.
so mark
Okay,
that one out.
yes,
Yeah.
okay,
But that,
and then.
I'll send out an email to the entire committee after tonight's meeting, just to clarify and get everyone's availability. If the 21st doesn't work for anyone, then we can.
So why not the 8th again then?
The 8th also, if there's no other, I haven't checked that on the official calendar, that could also be open. As long as there's no other meeting, I just don't have the calendar in front of me. The 21st was a natural, since there was no meeting that date and it was just sliding it 1 week back. That was the reason why we put there on a placeholder to call attention to it.
But you do have the economic meeting or the economic development meetings at the same time.
It's 1 hour beforehand, and the reason for that is the economic development budget is only about 4 items within the budget, so it's a pretty quick meeting since it's a budget focused meeting. That being said, it usually happens, the EDC meeting comes in first, and then it switches out with the admin PW.
I just find it, even like tonight, there's planning and zoning going on. Can't go to planning and zoning when you're in a subcommittee meeting, so it really just makes it a challenge to try to figure out, especially if it's in your ward. How can you be at both meetings? And I know the staff has got to kind of deal with that, but my only concern is it seems to me that there's a lot of last minute changing, so.
And then I didn't see an admin meeting in November. On the calendar,
In November, you said?
yes.
I can check with that.
Yeah.
Double check.
Yeah, because we don't have it on this list.
Oh, I
So
know, I
no
just-
projected, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so I'm not sure if that's because of the holiday.
I don't
Because
know.
we're usually on the second day.
It's election
Oh, it's
day.
election day, so we just. Okay.
Gotcha.
Thanks, that's it.
I'll send a follow-up email too.
Miscellaneous concerns. Okay. Well, I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn, made by Councilmember Hopper, seconded by Councilmember Marshall. It's non-debatable. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Mum is the word.
Any abstain? Thank you very much for coming.